The United States is becoming the victim of and the source of adverse impacts stemming from our lack of understanding of the world. As the world becomes increasingly globalized, students will need to know how to interact in this system in order to be effective adults. Furthermore, the U.S. needs to create a citizenry that can learn from and be more conscious of the rest of the world. Many children throughout the world, members of the panel, die every year because this country has adopted a policy of aggression instead of understanding. Now is the time to make a radical shift and ensure that the upcoming generation will be more equipped to learn from the rest of the world. And so to go back, my case is that we require study abroad for high school graduation. So the 2 points that I'm going to bring within that is how this is in students' best interest and in the best interest of society as a whole. First, one of the things that students get out of this is very critical is communication skills. We have to learn how to communicate more effectively. One of the main challenges that you face when you study abroad in terms of communication is communicating with people whose first language isn't English, who aren't as proficient, and being able to break things down into much simpler terms in order to explain your points more fully is a skill that would be absolutely helpful. And also the second skill that would be helpful in terms of communication is expressing our culture, explaining that to other people and getting a better understanding of who we are as an identity and being able to share that identity and also having a shared understanding of the other person's identity. And this is something that we feel has to come from real world on the ground experience. It's one thing to have a history or social studies class or world cultures class or something like that. However, just like in a science experiment, to really understand what is happening, you really have to go into that other culture and really get to talk to people and participate in activities and do all of those sorts of things. And so the second skill that students get out of this is learning how to do comparative knowledge. This is especially important in the business world. We know that our education system, one of the primary obligations that it has, is to prepare students to be able to be the most productive as possible when it comes to the economy, when it comes to being able to support themselves and their families and any other economic goals that they have. And so when you do study abroad, you get to learn how to compare things more fully, how to compare different types of, say, business models, for example. One of the most prominent examples of this is customer service in terms of what makes the most sense. Some countries have much different standards for customer service than others, and being able to understand the dynamics of how that works, along with many other differences in business practices, is a very important thing that students can get out of this. Second, it's in society's best interest as well. Again, we can look at this comparative knowledge experience as well. It needs to happen from actually being in another culture, in another form of government in order to understand this. We have very set views here in the United States as to like how our government works, and a lot of people are not really willing to shift in those changes. You have some people who say like, we should just be completely like capitalistic, like just because that's like what I believe. Whereas instead we think that people really have to learn how to dig into these issues and see what has worked for different countries and what hasn't, and come up with the best possible solutions, whatever that may be. So on the fundamental level of how government works, and also on individual policies. One of the two things that I looked at that differ vastly from the US and other countries are transportation and education. In terms of transportation, what solutions work for other countries? For example, a lot of other places use high-speed rail versus traditional highways, or more buses, or use more cars. And so being able to look at these other countries and see the similarities and differences can help solve questions as to whether different systems would work or not. For example, we are not nearly as population dense as Japan, so could we really have the train systems that Japan has or not? Being able to answer those questions, we think, is very important to have that actual experience. And in terms of education, I think we know, for example, in Korea or in China, students spend a lot more time studying, whereas here there's a lot more focus on extracurriculars. And being able to make, again, that comparison, I think we can make more informed decisions as to what is really best for our students in terms of educational policy. And in a democracy, especially when it is citizens themselves that are making these decisions, it's very important that the citizens as a whole are much more informed on being able to make these comparisons. And so what do we think are some additional outcomes that are going to come out of this in terms of foreign policy, how the rest of the world is going to view us? As we know that a lot of people around the world view the U.S., as we talked about, as an aggressor, and also just a country that sort of goes into other countries and tries to impose its will on them. And so the first thing that's accomplished in having required study abroad is the gesture. Countries around the world will see, finally the U.S. is trying to understand our culture, understand our issues, and not just impose its own will. And so we think that there's going to be a lot of positives that are going to come out of that diplomatically just by having that simple gesture. And then second, as we're actually able to dig in more in these issues, understand certain policy issues that impact people, like, for example, a lot of people that I spoke to when I visited South Korea felt that the U.S. Was not doing enough to help with the North-South Korea issue, or even felt that the U.S. was further antagonizing the issue. And so being able to understand those perspectives, or the perspective on how our fashion trends or our economic trends. And so again, having that understanding in order to show countries that we are able to change. And finally, on the point of war. We think one of the main reasons wars happen is it is very easy in the status quo for politicians to be able to convince the American people that there's an otherization effect, that like we are people of good values and good morals, and the other people in, say, X country or Y country that we need to invade do not have as good of these values, are not really as human as we are. And so once you have an entire generation of people who have been to other countries, who have been exposed to other cultures, they're going to look at that differently, and they're going to say, well, wait a minute, I have been to some of these places, my friends have also been to some of these places, and we understand that these are people too. For example, in World War II, that people were able to be infused with a negative image of Japan. They called people Japs and things like that. However, now we know that would be completely unacceptable because a lot of students and a lot of business people have gone to Japan and built positive relationships with them. And so we think that this effect would happen with many other countries, and we'd be much less likely to go to war. And so finally, in conclusion, panelists, in this new era where students must understand the globalized market, where we need to rethink our political thought process, where our relationships with the world are vital, and when the human toll of war is crippling, we must take a bold step towards a better future. Support the requirement of study abroad for all high school graduates.